as part of either ecumenia. It cannot be considered as part of a cultural expansion. It cannot be considered as part of an expansion of a whole system which is selling certain values. Now today, we have the biggest business in this world today is that of human rights. I had a grandson 3.5 years ago, and my son said that, Papa, we are making a separate bedroom for the child. I said, but why on earth are you doing it just now? Let the child grow. He said, but the law requires it. We have to make a small bedroom, we have to put a cot. This is Texas, United States. Otherwise the inspector can come around and say that we have deprived the child of the rights of good living. I'm not joking. And then, I don't want to go into this. He finally had to fall back to the Indian ways to have a normal childhood. But then this is a civilizational, cultural conflict which is being created. You know the cases, the case that happened in Norway or Sweden or somewhere. And this is a big industry. It's a big industry there that I walk into your home being an organization that takes care of children, accuse you of mistreating your child, take money from the state, take the child and the money both. Now, this kind of culture is one of the continuations of earlier white racist colonialism. And it has come down in very, very different packing right now. And it is something we have to talk about very frankly. You see, there was a time when you would simply claim the land in the name of God, put the cross there as soon as you land there and say that, and whatever you take, you give 25% to the king of Spain or the king of England or whatever, and the rest you keep. It was as blatant as that. And then you slowly started making it more sophisticated in terms of property, in terms of copyrights, in terms of rights which you will have for another 50 years because you have made an invention. So the very idea that knowledge is something which does not belong to one mind or one person or one culture or one political body is entirely put aside and an entirely different system is brought in. So my humble submission is that we have to take care of this discourse first. All arts are good. When I wanted to learn music, I was looking for the best music teacher. Whether he was a Muslim, whether he ate meat, whether he took garlic or not, you see. And I learned from Hindus and I learned from Muslims. And this has, and we all know. People have for generations, they got converted to Islam, but they continue to sing Saraswati Vandana, etc. Because if they won't, their repertoire will disappear, the daggers will not be into existence anymore. So, it is at this point that you create a distinction between so-called culture or arts and politics. But you don't do this in Pakistan. If you go to the Lahore University and say there that Amir Khusro did not invent the tabla, you will not come back from Pakistan. That's why I have never been to Pakistan. It's a fact. Because they make it a point of honor. Well, thank you so much. I will now invite the other two speakers to join the debate.
I'm not the speaker, but because, and I should have given you this apology earlier from Dr. Giti Sen, who was going to be our speaker, but our trip to the Middle East got preponed. And so unfortunately, she is not with us. But gender parity should always be allowed. Please do not frown on my taking liberties on behalf of the feminine sex. So I just one word before, I'm sure Prem has a lot to say to what Bharat has just said, and we have a lot to add, contribute, and you know, elucidate what Bharat has said. But to finish with what he was saying, one of my favorite stories is from the Vishnu Dharmotar Purana. The one talking about syncretism, which both the honorable speakers spoke about, which is about this king who decides to want to educate himself on visual arts, on the art of painting. So he gets himself to a teacher and says, I would like to learn how to paint. And the sage says, you want to learn how to paint? Okay. So you will first have to go and learn how to sing. So he says, but I wanted to learn just how to use colors and line and drawing. So he says, no, but to understand that, you need to know what is the impetus of music. And finally, the king says, okay, he goes to a teacher who teaches him music, who would teach him music if he agreed to. But the music teacher doesn't agree. And he says, oh, but you can't learn music without learning how to dance. So he says, now I don't plan to learn dance. Why do I have to go to this route? He says, because there is a life impetus in movement, which animates music, which then finally will teach you how to draw a line. So I'm sorry, you can't learn how to sing unless you know how to dance. So finally, after several years, King Markandeya finally has enough knowledge to be able to go back to the guru who was to teach him how to paint. And this is detailed in about a full chapter on this syncretism that we are talking about. May I now request him to add to our understanding of this complex subject?
Actually, I don't know whether I can add to understanding of the subject. It's a vast subject. But I would really like to hear what the audience has to say. But then I just wanted to show you where they connect between what Professor Gupta said and what I said earlier, which is I started by talking about where culture divides and where it unites. So essentially, what I was doing was I was analyzing the concept of culture itself at least two levels. What Professor Gupta has done is to add the dimension of why does culture become divisive? And the answer that is given is one that I completely agree with. It is a product in our immediate history, near-term history. It's certainly a product of colonialism. But colonialism itself is something that has antecedents. And what you ultimately come back to is this. I find a very interesting convergence, disturbing one too actually. Societies that were predatory in their economic behavior also developed exclusivist religions, messianic religions. And the combination of the messianism became a justification for continuing with their predatory behavior. The predatory behavior came first. It came first because not all parts of the world were equally well to do. Greece, Rome, the Indus Valley civilization, the Egyptian civilization, all the great civilizations were basically around, were India, southern China, and the Mediterranean. They were all in what you might call the southern latitudes. They all had plenty of sunshine. They all had plenty of which is much closer to the last ice age. We're talking about 5,000-6,000 years ago. They were much wetter. They had plenty of rain. Where we have the Thar Desert today, Alexander was there were grasslands. They described. So you had a completely different world at that time. And if you look at the invasions in Europe, they were from the north. The Vandals, the Huns, the Goths, the Visigoths. They were all from the cold, miserable, uncomfortable, nasty parts of Europe, of people searching for a better life and being driven by greed and envy. That's the essence of predatory societies. They were predatory because they were poor. And when this came and settled in the Mediterranean countries, they merged their identities. To keep them out, the Romans built the most fantastic empire. The war machine. The Roman Empire owes its power and longevity to the fact that it was the first society that created a standing army. The very first. Now, the thing is, and it was created in order to block these the raiders from the north. If you come to India, Balban heard about Genghis Khan and the great spread westward of Mongols. And he is the first Indian ruler who actually created a standing army, and he posted them on the passes. He built forts, Khyber and Bolan Pass and other places. And the Mongols came to the gateway of India and turned away and carried on westwards. So the desire, that one came later. This was Balban was in the 13th century. 13th century. 13th century. Yeah. So the thing is, so what one finds is, first comes the inequality and the desire to possess. By the way, European colonialism was based on exactly the same thing. The Crusades opened the eyes of Europe to the fantastic wealth, riches, diversity of products of the East, whether it was spices, whether it was silks, whether it was cottons, jewelry, gold, silver, etc. But they had nothing to trade with. So the alternative to trade was conquest. That is the origin of the European expansion, of the search for sea routes, the whole lot. But behind it all, you also find that there is where the soldier went, the church went with him. Whether to South America or to Asia. And that combination in its many, many forms of, it expressed itself right through literature, philosophy, the works, essentially is a predatory culture. And so culture, in history, culture has both driven and justified division. And it's done that for good solid economic reasons. And frankly, I think I've said enough. Thank you.
No, but is it right to call that? I think that there's a point that this is culture in a language which is different from our understanding of culture.
No, hold a moment. Look, let us simply, the one thing I will not get into is an endless and meaningless discussion of the meaning of terms. Culture is probably the most vapid term in the English language. You can't define it.
So we can agree to say
But it exists. It manifests itself exactly as I said. It manifests itself in the way we live, in the way we behave. Why is it that we did not have exclusive messianic religions in India? Why is it that mysticism prevailed? Why is it that when Islam came to India, it developed its own mysticism? Because that is a very positive cultural interaction. But you can't have a cultural interaction without differences of cultures. So you can't say culture didn't exist. You can't say because there's no word for culture. There's no word for culture because there was no need to divide. The idea of culture, you talk about culture only because there's a contrast. You can't have a true coin unless you have a counterfeit coin. You can't talk of night if there's not also daytime. You have to have it.
my point is
That doesn't change anything.
that both the divisiveness and the unified points, the meeting point would be the impetus to create art, creativity. That is where this dilemma can be resolved, and that is where there are recent initiatives being taken to take art and culture and heritage understanding to Jammu and Kashmir for peace issues. I think that is a step in the right direction.
My question is that you can take it to Jammu and Kashmir, provided you don't rename the Shankaracharya hill into Takht-e-Suleiman. Now, when you are doing that, and there is a resolution, and I think it's already done officially, then is this an instance of preserving cultural heritage? Or is it the same thing? That because you want to now create a Darul Islam in the Kashmir Valley, therefore everything which has a name which is pre-Islamic has to be now converted. Now you see, when you mentioned the Vandals and the Goths, let me draw your attention to the fact that all the destruction that the Vandals and the Goths did in the Mediterranean was at the instance of the Christians. They had not come into Greece, they had not come into Italy earlier, they could not have. Number one, because Rome was strong and it was keeping them. But once Christianity becomes a political force and started destroying the whole remnants of Greek culture, then they invited the Vandals and the Goths to come and do the destruction job. It is just like America creating the Taliban.
Well, I'm not going to go into the parallels because they're very far apart in time, and you could also have, I think that many Americans would definitely agree with the rest of what we've said and not agree with that, but let's leave that out. But otherwise, I agree with Professor Gupta because this is the whole point about, let's take Kashmir. You're also right about the Goths, but then, I don't know enough about that. I do know a little bit about Kashmir. It's not Rishi Islam, which is Islam of the vast majority of Kashmiris. And first, you can't talk of Jammu and Kashmir in the same breath. They're utterly and completely different. Even the Islam of Jammu is entirely different from Islam of Kashmir. And within Kashmir itself, there are at least two, if not three different strands of Islam. So, but Rishi Islam, which is the dominant Islam in the valley, is entirely syncretic. And all this renaming is not aimed at Hinduism. It's aimed at discrediting syncretic Rishi Islam. In fact, all over the world, you find that the Wahhabi tradition, backed by money, its main task has been to destroy other forms of Islam. Look at Indonesia. Look at Malaysia. Look at Thailand. I was in southern Thailand a month and a half ago, and a third of the people around me were wearing burqas. I couldn't have imagined it in Thailand. These are all things that come out of the abuse of religion. And see, messianic religions allow it or make it easy. It's because they say there is only one true God, there is only one path to Him. Who's going to show you the path? The priesthood will. If you dare to disagree with them, you're threatening the power of the priesthood, therefore you're a heretic. And the more threatened they feel, the more extreme becomes the punishment that they dole out. The Albigensi, the Cathars in France and Spain, were destroyed in the 11th century and 12th centuries by Rome actually doing exactly what you described, taking the impoverished knights of Northern Europe and saying, come down here, these people are doing so well for themselves. But you know what they're saying? They're saying that Catholicism is all wrong, Rome is evil, do not pay any tithes to Rome. The ultimate question was, do not pay any tithes to Rome. These very rich mercantile communities were coming up in France and Spain, you know. And they were being advised by these people whose priesthood, they were called perfects, were extremely simple and who lived among the people, who tended to the problems of the people, and very much like what's happening just now, Kya Kehte Isko, not the Lashkar ke jo parent organization. No, parent organization Lashkar. What's that?
Taliban? Tabligis.
By Jan, what is the name of this?
Tabligis.
No, they're
Wahhabis?
no, I think I'm not. I'm getting a series of mental blocks now. The Surgeon General, forget about Pakistan, but there is a all-embracing social charitable society, which whose name
Baha'i? Any foundation?
No, I'm also missing it. But
I'm sorry.
It's an all world organization.
But the thing is, doesn't matter. The question is that coming back to Kashmir, this business of attacking your own religion from the right is, I'm afraid, also visible in India in a very mild kind of way, but it's visible in India. And this is the messianic culture invading Hinduism. Hinduism is not a messianic religion.
Could it be looking for historical perspectives and researching and exploring the need for facts, historically analyzing things? Why do we have to? Anyway, now it's time for us
long since given up trying to pretend that they're objective
Okay,
facts.
so may I just kindly ask the audience now to come in, please, and help us with their thoughts.
I actually have a question rather than a thought. In fact, two, and this is Professor good intervention on that. One is, I've always been perplexed by the fact, what role does the education play? Does the education help in uniting the culture, or does it actually help in dividing? Is it really an awareness which is used in a constructive and positive way? Or is awareness used to sort of consolidate your beliefs or preconceived notions? So the role that the education play, whether it serves as a catalyst in uniting or dividing, that's one question that I had. The second, do you see that the younger generation in India, I'm still talking of not really the ones who are already in their teens, but perhaps those which are still about 9 to 10 years old, but which probably in 20 years from now would be in the mainstream society and political sphere and economy. Do you see them really be more inclined towards cultural unity, or rather withdrawing into these sort of their own individual cultural identities? And does globalization sort of impact them in their thinking? And this is something which I think is very crucial, because we will be a very, very young nation, and how the youth of India are going to perceive culture is really also going to have a tremendous amount of, I would say, impact on how the political institutions grow in probably next Lok Sabha election onwards. If not, in this itself, you see some signs. Because there is a strong connection culture and politics as well. So, and I think that's something is again which probably if you can throw light on.
Well, very briefly, your question.
Thank you. The benefactor's hand. Well, you have two questions. The first is about what does education do? It all depends what are the texts of your education. For 150 years or 200 years, there have been no Indian texts in our education at any level. All art, all culture is called extracurricular. The job of the music and the painting teacher in schools is to make garlands and give it to the VIPs who come. And the universities think that, music, etc., these are the most useless subjects. They are not even respectable, Sanskrit, etc. So there has been a continuation in the Nehruvian era of the older British model and the same ideals, because the ideals are to make money, to be competitive, and they are not the ideals by which any sensible civilization can live by, let alone our civilization. So unless you bring in the Indian text back into education at every level, you are not going to see any resurgence. Europe made a great resurgence in 14th century by taking borrowed texts, the Greek and the Roman texts. And Indians have thrown their own texts into the dustbin and therefore have no text. This is the answer to the first question. The second is about the young generation. The young generation have seen the failure of, first of all, the secular state. They have seen the failure of the socialist state. They have seen the rapacious activity of the neo-capitalist or, carpet beggar kind of capitalism. And so they are absolutely confused. I mean, as in my time, you just had to go into IAS or something and get a secure career. You can't do that anymore. So they are very confused. But then, for them, we have provided no education. We have provided now the internet and a whole lot of things which are out of schools. And therefore they are groping into it. They are going into all kinds of forums, social media, electronic media, but that is what the middle class can do. What about the millions who belong to the poor classes? So we are living in
that we're talking of poor and middle class and everything, but don't you think that the poor is actually preserving the culture? I mean, we talk of folk songs, we talk of all artisans and everything. Isn't that the class which is preserving the culture?
Well, yes. Opposed to other cultures, and believe you me, other cultures exist. The more you start questioning your own, and you get a development of what sociologists Islam call the socially reflexive society. Socially reflexive, it's a new word. Didn't even exist when I was in college, but it does capture this. The frame that I was talking about, the frame of values that we come into the world, is being increasingly questioned because of the constant interaction with other frames. And the fact that, if you're living in one world, you're working in a globalized corporation, you're working in a United Nations organization, you're working in an international NGO, you're going to constantly be meeting people who come with different cultural frames. And therefore, if you're not going to engage even on those areas with them and listen to them and question your own in the process, and question theirs for that matter, then you will not in fact be able to communicate, and you will only have conflict in fact. And it's this search for synthesis, or like syncretism, that makes societies socially reflexive. Now in this context, the poor are much less exposed to this, so that they keep your culture as inherited to a much larger extent. But this reflexivity also feeds into culture at its highest level. So you find there's interaction in literature, there's interaction in poetry, there's interaction in dance. Not all of it is good. For example, I am not a votary of the kind of interaction that's taking place between Indian classical dance and Western forms of dance. And the techno bhangra doesn't turn me on, quite honest with you. So the thing is, so there is that too, but there's a tremendous amount of tremendously, vital energy that's been released by this.
I'd like to add to this one thing, that we pride ourselves, and rightly so, on a Ganga Jamuni Tehzeeb. The Ganga Jamuni Tehzeeb, which is the Hindu-Muslim strands in our culture, have been preserved totally, I believe, by the poorest of the poor of this land. They are so well versed in the intricacies of even art forms. I was once sitting next to a working class person, a labourer, who was in Hamsadhwani theatre many years ago. It was a very humbling experience. And Sanjukta Panigrai, who is considered one of the great divas of Odissi and is no more, she was performing. And they were, the labourers who were working on some construction next to the site came down, sat down, and I remember clearly that when I saw this man's dhoti, it was grubby, really dirty. And when I was leaving, I just said, "Kaise laga aapko?" That answer of that man was, "ये जो अभी कर रही थी चारी, ये तो बिल्कुल इस तरह से नहीं होनी चाहिए थी, इनको भंगी में जाके इनको बदलना चाहिए था, इस चारी से भंगी में जाना चाहिए." These are Sanskrit technical terms. These are the people who have done this. And the Langas, the Mangyas, religion has had very little impact on them. I believe that whatever their religion is today, whether it was due to conversions, whether it was their native religion, it really matters at a very different personal level to them. They are into their art forms fully, and that is what has kept this culture alive. That's my view. You were asking that? Please.
Well, this is to all the panelists here. But we've talked of a lot of history and historical cultures. What about today? For instance, I think sensitivity goes hand in hand with culture. What Professor Hook said about in Jerusalem, like it's happened to Zubin Mehta. Now, it's not easy to probably analyze India and known the grassroots. Perhaps he could have been a little more sensitive about certain class of people being hurt by some of his works. You know, there were some who were politicizing it, but there must have been some who were genuinely hurt because they worship those goddesses, and then they see certain images which they cannot. So this sensitivity, I think, is very important, no matter what class or where you've reached in your art form. That's all.
I'm very happy